Hello, this is a video for Worship Arts. Going through John 5. I'm using the live feature more just to have this be something that streams and then gets posted, as my photo booth on my laptop has been weird today and I've had to re-record things a couple times. So I'm just going to do a live feature and go from there. So if this is Worship Arts and you're a Worship Arts student, feel free to stick around. And if you're not, no need to be here at the moment. I'll be making some for my other classes throughout the day. So Worship Arts, this week we've got John chapters 5 and 6 as we keep our John study going together. We'll be going through some text. I've got digital notes posted in the digital resources tab for this lesson, which I'll be making public after doing these videos, just so that everything's up and live for you as we kind of go from there. I just want to make a video talking through John 5 for all of you, and then I'll make a second one shortly for John chapter 6 in just a moment, as we all kind of get to learn and discuss together. Just like last week, there'll be discussions on turnitin.com for you to take part in for each of our 2 chapters. Last week we had the ones for John 2, 3, and 4. This week it'll be John 5 and 6. That gives you all an opportunity to still kind of keep a community together, keep learning together. I know for a class like Worship Arts, being online based isn't really ideal, but I'm glad that we get to use discussions as a way for you all to still interact as we pour into a gospel and try to see what it has in store for us. So for this video, I'm going to be talking through John chapter 5. Again, use those notes that I've got posted in the digital resources. And then once this is done and you've gone through the notes yourself, you are clear to head on into the discussion on turnitin.com. So John chapter 5. Now, if you'll recall, as we work through our first few chapters of John, in 2 through 4, we started to point out some of these signs of Jesus's divinity, things, miracles and wonders that Jesus is doing that aren't just meant to either save or heal someone in that present moment, but are also meant to be reflective of Old Testament actions by God, to really try to drive home this point that not only is Jesus something and someone different, but that Jesus is God. There's a verse we're going to read in chapter 5, a little stretch we're going to read that actually kind of really drive that home and enforce that. This idea that Jesus didn't come to be like a updated version of God the Father. Jesus came to clarify everything we ever would have understood about God the Father. That Jesus acts how God always has been acting throughout all of the teaching, stories, and events of the Old Testament. So with that, John chapter 5, we're going to see some continuation of these signs, and in 6 as well, but that's for next video. So chapter 5 starts out at verse 1 through 17 with a healing of a man at a what would have been like a ceremonial cleansing pool, but that healing happens on the Sabbath. So I'm going to just read through it briefly and quickly. Feel free to read along in your text, and then we'll talk through what to kind of do with this. So verse 1, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus came into the pool, when the water is stirred up, and while I am going another steps down before me, Jesus said to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed. He took up his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" And they asked him, "Who is the man who said that to you? Take up your bed and walk." Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working now, and I am working." Now, this story, this healing of this man at the pool on the Sabbath, is what we consider the third sign in the book of John of Jesus' divinity. A few things that I want to point out. One, I think it's fascinating that Jesus doesn't, and this is a common thing in Jesus' healings, he doesn't faith check the guy before he heals him. He doesn't say, "Before I heal you, do you know who I am?" It even says after the man's healed, he still doesn't know who Jesus is. He just listens to the words of Jesus when Jesus says, "Get up and walk." I think that's a really powerful thing for us as worship leaders to take away from a story like this. Jesus doesn't keep this man at arm's length, wait till the man shows proper faith, and then heals the man. All Jesus is asking this guy to do is listen to his words. For us, I think sometimes we need to do the same. We have all these words and teachings of Jesus that we do need to just sometimes get out of the way of ourselves so that we can just listen to what it is that Jesus is asking of us. I'm reminded of when Jesus says to Peter to feed my sheep. This is what Jesus asks us to do as leaders of worship. We know that we're all part of the sheep of the flock of Christ, who is our great shepherd. As worship leaders, then, we're asked not necessarily to be shepherds in place of Jesus, but to be, I guess, shepherding sheep who point other sheep towards the great shepherd who is Jesus. Jesus doesn't faith check. He just asks this man to listen to his words. Jesus' words bring healing. They bring life. The other aspect of this, that Jesus heals on the Sabbath day. Now, it's, of course, controversial for the people around him, the Jewish teachers that are very legalistic and say nothing at all is supposed to be done on the Sabbath day, let alone like healing someone. That's a huge work. We see through this story and a few other stories, one of which we'll get later, not in today's stuff, but in the future. We see that Jesus doesn't seem nearly concerned about those restrictions on the Sabbath as these teachers do. Instead, Jesus often responds with, "What better day is there to heal than on the Sabbath?" Remember what the Sabbath was meant for? The Sabbath was first given to God's people after they came out of slavery in Egypt, where every day's work, every day's labor, and every day's pain. One of the first things that God says to them when they get to Mount Sinai is, you get to take one day a week to rest. In fact, you should rest. Rest is good. Rest is beautiful. In rest, there's healing and there's life. So we get this idea, and this is something that shows up in some of our other Gospels, but this idea that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath. That what the Sabbath is what Jesus is all about. It's in the gift of Sabbath and the gift of rest that we find the healing and love of Jesus. The next portion that I want to point you to, verses 19 through 29, and I'm going to read just a portion of it. Please read the whole section of it, but there's a portion in which I just want to start it off, and I'll stop after a few verses. This is at 19. So Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing, and greater works than these will he show him, so that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will. The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father." Pausing there. This is huge because, again, like I said at the beginning of this video, no one is supposed to look at Jesus as a updated version of God. No one's supposed to look at Jesus as like a different version, as if God of the Old Testament is one way and then Jesus is a different way. Instead, Jesus' words and actions are meant to reflect how God the Father is and always has been. And it says that Jesus, being like God, takes on the full judgment of God the Father so that we can take part in the resurrection of Jesus. This is what's so, well, there's a lot of things, but this is one of the things that's so powerful about what Jesus does on the cross and in walking out of a tomb. Jesus takes our judgment onto the cross, takes all the judgment of the Father, as it says here, so that then when Jesus is able to walk right out of the tomb, resurrected and alive, well, if Jesus took our judgment, we then rise as well. It's this beautiful and powerful accomplishment of what Jesus does that's real for you and for me and anyone who hears these words of Jesus and follows them. Just like the man who's healed at the beginning of this chapter, he hears the words of Jesus, he follows those words. It's following the words of Jesus that bring life. The last portion of this chapter, it's titled, at least the section in my Bible, is The Witnesses to Jesus. I want to really focus on verse 41 to 47, just for the purposes of the video, but please, of course, read the whole section. Starting at verse 41, this is Jesus speaking. I do not receive glory from people, but I know that you do not have the love of God within you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, you will receive him. How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, on whom you have set your hope. For if you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? This is a portion in which he's directly condemning some of the Jewish teachers and preachers of the law, the people who, of course, know the scriptures in and out. There's a weird warning here, and I want to say it, but I'm going to clarify it, because if you just hear the first way of how I'm going to say it, it sounds confusing in a certain way. In some way here, Jesus is warning against knowing scripture or emphasizing our knowledge of scripture so much that we then aren't able to be open to the living, breathing, and moving work of God. Now, my follow-up is we absolutely should know scripture, and we should know it as in and out as we possibly can. I mean, daily focus on the words and teachings of God is a spiritual practice that's, of course, encouraged strongly. What we also need to do then is be open to how those teachings that we find in the Bible guide us to be open to how God's moving now. Jesus tells these teachers, basically, you know all the words of Moses, but why don't you believe them? Knowing what God says is a great thing that we should absolutely strive for. But being open to how the things God says impact our lives and push us to then put belief and trust in this way of Jesus, that's what Jesus is pushing us towards in a story like this. Remember that Jesus' words bring life and they bring healing. And so reflecting on these words of Jesus, that's what we have in store for us. That's our John 5. Take the notes down. Make sure you put them into your notes as well. There's discussion for you on turnitin.com to take part in. I'm off to then make a video for John 6, which you can watch right after this one, or you can watch at a additional day this week. But in the meantime, blessings on your day, on your week. I miss you all dearly, and may you be filled with the love, grace, and peace of Christ as we keep this online structure going. God's blessings, guys, and we'll see you shortly.